Welcome to the Sustainable Success Show, where we share real-world ideas, strategies, and systems to help you build success that lasts in business and life. Each episode delivers practical insights you can apply immediately without burnout, chaos, or short-term fixes that don't scale. At the foundation is emotional intelligence and effective communication, how you lead yourself and how you connect with others across personalities, generations, and cultures, because that's where trust, engagement, and performance are created. I'm Christopher Salem, your host, and this is where sustainable success becomes your competitive advantage. Hi, welcome to Sustainable Success. We are excited to introduce to you again our new format. Here we are. Not only can you listen to us on Apple and Spotify, and of course, all the other areas where you can listen to audio-based podcasts, but guess what? We are now visual. Yes, we are in video format now. Now you could check out the show. If you want to watch and see it in person, you could do that on our YouTube channel. All that information is in the show notes. And we want to thank, again, all the listeners that have been with us now, diehards, for almost 9 years. Yes, I can't believe it's been almost 9 years. But we are going to this new format. We started at the beginning of this year. We decided that. And we're not going to be an hour long anymore. We're only going to be about 30 to 40 minutes in that time frame. So we hope those that did like the old format of an hour, great, we understand. But again, based upon some research, we found that most listeners prefer anything between 30 and 40 minutes. And we want to make sure we accommodate most everybody, and based upon how we can deliver quality content that's going to align with you and your business objectives moving forward. Our show is currently sponsored by Alumni Direct. Alumni Direct is a new social media community platform dedicated to bringing alumni together from all different generational types and an opportunity to meet new people for the first time. Now, it is a membership program taking out all the noise out of social media. You get to generate genuine and authentic relationships with the people you choose to interact with. If you'd like some more information about Alumni Direct, check them out at alumnidirect.com. That's alumnidirect.com. Well, we got a great show for you today. We also want to encourage everybody, I forgot, also follow us on Facebook, where we've been for almost 9 years, at Sustainable Success 2017. That was the day we started, May of 2017. Feel free to follow us there, where you'll have access, again, to all the past episodes. I believe we're approaching almost 500 episodes, yes, that we've done over that time. So feel free to follow us there as well. Today's show is going to be, we're going to be talking about the Empathic Leader, how EQ via empathy transforms leadership for better profit, productivity, and innovation. And this is all going to be based upon a book that came out about back in mid-year of last year. And this is someone that has been on the show before. And perhaps you probably remember her from a past episode under our old format. But we're going to be here again with Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller. She is an author, TEDx speaker, leadership coach, and host of the Empathic Leadership podcast. Motivated by personal experience and deep love of learning, Melissa has conducted extensive research on the role of empathy and effective leadership through the lens of emotional intelligence. Her groundbreaking findings and compelling stage presence have inspired audiences around the world, including TEDx and institutions such as Yale University, Columbia University, and Northwestern University. She has also spoken at Oxford University and Cambridge University and written for LA Weekly, Deadline News UK, the San Francisco Post, and Authority Magazine, among others. She's on a mission to transform the way we connect and understand one another within organizations by applying strategic, actionable empathy to help build more connected, human-centered workplaces and communities. With more titles currently in development, she continues her work to redefine leadership through the power of empathy and emotional intelligence. And without further ado, we welcome Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller to the show. Hi, Dr. Melissa.
Hey, Chris, it's so good to be back. Thank you. And congratulations on moving to the video format. That's a big step.
Yes, thank you so much. We are so excited with this. We figure now we can, we know people also like to watch things. So those people that are on the go, well, we can traditionally listen to it how they've always have. But now for those people that like to kind of see the guests, maybe even look at my ugly mug every now and then. But nonetheless, I'd love to start off today's talk about the empathic leader and how you help and transform organizations, including their bottom line. what led to writing this book in this area, like your journey that really got you that point that said, hey, I got to put out a book on this, knowing that based upon your experience, research, that there was a need for organizations to really adopt the empathic leadership principles.
Sure, and that's a fantastic question, honestly, especially in the climate we have now in our organizations and, globally, it's a hot topic right now because we need it. So for me, I was actually a musician. I was a French horn player for like decades. That's what I did. I loved it. I traveled. I got to play with people like Ray Charles and Mannheim Steamroller and, really cool stuff. But I really like, food, shelter, and clothing, and sometimes being a gigging musician,
That's true.
you know. So I went back, I got my first doctorate, and I went to teach at a university. And within my first term there, I was assaulted by a colleague. And unfortunately, as horrible as that was, what came after trying to talk to people and get through to my bosses and my boss's bosses and people within the institution and the system was even worse, because it was just 7 years of completely hitting a wall that was a lack of humanity. People didn't want to know. They wanted to keep me quiet. They wanted to keep the status quo, and they just didn't really care as long as everybody shut up, basically. And at the time, I mean, I was too busy being wound up in what was going on to necessarily say this is a lack of empathy. But eventually it led to me having to leave music altogether, which was a really hard thing. I mean, it's all I'd ever known. And I had to, now we're going into COVID. Well, I'm going to have to figure out what to do about this. And my husband and I, in the meantime, had done some consulting in healthcare circles. And I kept seeing this lack of humanity and this lack of connection, like over and over and over again, to the point that it was a pattern that was going to come up every time. And I started trying to put this together and say, what's missing here? What's going on? Because these are people that in their personal lives, awesome people, with their families or like in healthcare with patients or that kind of thing. But within these systems, they just, it's like they were broken machines, and it just didn't really matter who got chewed up in the process. And the problem as well is that they were losing profit. They were losing productivity and innovation because of this treatment. And so I finally just said, look, this is something that definitely needs to be addressed. And I'm hearing this empathy thing coming up over and over again. I'm hearing it from Brene Brown. I'm hearing it from Seth Godin. I'm hearing it from Simon Sinek. So let's just dig in, up to the elbows and see what we can come up with. And
I love it. I love it. And it's so true, because I'm also in this space, and I talk on EQ myself, and it is so important. This is what I love what you're doing, because it's people like you and me that have to be the example to put this out there. I'd love to get your insights on, when you're looking at leaders in any type of organization, and I'm not saying all leaders, but a lot of leaders are going to be driven by the bottom line, right? They're driven by, numbers, results, KPIs, all of the above, OKRs, that type of thing.
Yeah.
When we look at the return on investment and empathy in business, what can you say to leaders who still don't see a business case for empathy?
So one of the big studies that I pull out, because I'm research based, I don't want to just like spout a bunch of opinions. I want to say, this is where this comes from. And there was a big study done by Ernst & Young, big four global consultancy, that's definitely a known name. And this happened in 2021 after COVID, but in the wake of the Great Resignation. And they were looking specifically at empathy. They wanted to know what empathy in these organizations can do. And they surveyed employees, they surveyed leaders. This was, mostly national, but with some international to it. And what they found out is that these institutions that actually used empathy effectively and actionably raised their productivity by 87%, innovation by 86%, and profit by 84%. And that's not Melissa giving opinions. That's Ernst & Young.
Ernst & Young, which I mean, is if you must be, you'd be like not in business if you don't know that source, right?
Yeah, for real, right?
So it is that, yeah, it doesn't get better than that. And Ernst & Young is definitely a highly credible resource, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is they're saying the same thing,
Yeah.
Payne. I can't remember now. Steve Payne, maybe. He's the vice chair of Americas for Ernst & Young. And the quote that came out of this was that empathy is no longer a nice to have. It is the glue and accelerant for the next era of transformation in business. Drop the mic.
I love it. I love it. So when we look at now emotional intelligence, EQ now, and let's apply it to real world leadership. A lot of times people will say, sounds good in theory, but in real life, does that stuff work? These are things I've been facing now for, God, I don't know how long I've heard that type of thing. I mean, I love the fact that you stated a lot of facts from credible sources like Ernst & Young. What does applying emotional intelligence actually look like in a tough business conversation?
So, and I hear what you're saying completely, because I get that same wall, well, what's it going to do? What's in it for me with him, right? What's in it for me? Well, for one thing, I mean, if you just want to start with bottom line type stuff, in 2023, businesses lost 1.2 trillion with a T dollars to bad communication.
Okay, yeah.
Just bad communication. And it keeps getting worse with AI and all of the different stuff that adds into it, and, that sort of thing. And that's one of your main, emotional intelligence skills, is that ability to communicate through understanding and perspective, which brings us back to empathy. So if we only use one emotional intelligence skill and we get communication right, we would save $1.2 trillion.
So true. I mean, when you think about communication amongst different personality, generational, cultural, and ethnic types, how you speak to one is not the same to another, and how we process information. Now, I'm not saying we all walk around with a disc assessment on our forehead saying, hey, I'm a D, I'm an I, and I'm, that type of thing. But the empathic leader doesn't have to be an expert, but maybe a general understanding to say, hey, he or she looks a little bit really task driven. It's about results before people. It doesn't mean they don't care about people. So if they're driven by the results itself, spare me the details, and we get a good idea. That's how. Then why don't we communicate to them based on that level? Get their buy-in, build that rapport. Love to get your insights on, what EQ and the empathic leader concepts that you talk about in your book can apply to it. Because I think communication either makes or breaks your business.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt. So the thing that I start with is definitions, because if we don't start on a common ground, then how can we even talk about this? And that's one of the problems that I find with some of these emotional intelligence skills in general, but empathy in particular, is if you say, what's the definition? People are like, well, it's this feeling thing. It's soft and it's puppies and rainbows. And it's like, okay, so let's back this up and actually talk about the definition. Because the empathy definition of I feel what you feel, that's one. There's 43 different definitions of empathy, and a lot of them have nothing to do with feelings. Empathy is about perspective taking and understanding the other. Now, if you're in business, perspective taking of the other should be one of the main things you do, whether it's understanding the perspective of the customer or your board of directors or your employees or whatever. How you get that perspective taking, I mean, there's different ways to do it. Like you mentioned the DISC assessment. That's one way of understanding another person's perspective. I talk about 3 kinds of empathy in particular, which is emotional empathy, which is the feeling one, cognitive empathy, which means I logically understand what you're feeling, I just don't feel anything, and self-empathy, which is something that I find a lot of these leaders lack,
Exactly right. And getting back to communication, what I love what you just said there, if we're going to become effective communicators, it starts with you. If you're not effectively communicating to yourself, I know a lot of people, they'll tell you otherwise because they lie to others, is that they're operating from their inner critic, not their inner champion. And how that reflects outward, whether if they know it consciously or not, is they're coming across either passively or aggressive to the people they're talking to. And either those 2 styles of communication are dependent, they're codependent, and they don't really improve the communication process. So I'd love if we can expand on any of that, based upon what you're doing there and anything from the book from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you nailed it. If you can't do this for yourself, and a lot of these people actually don't communicate well with themselves, and you're absolutely right, because they don't have that empathy and that perspective. I mean, these people in these leadership positions are generally very driven. They're very smart. They're very motivated, high self-actualizing people. And they generally want to do well. But the problem is a lot of times they're put in these positions not because they're the best leaders, but because they bring in the biggest contracts or they have the best sales skills or
I've seen that. Well, what do you do when somebody performs well? You promote them, but it doesn't mean you promote them to a managerial or a leadership position because they may be great at bringing in business and in building rapport with clients, but maybe they're not good with, building a team or building, working with their colleagues in the same capacity.
yeah. And maybe they don't even want it. They just know that this is supposed to be the next step. So now they're in this position where they're probably out of their depth, but they may not even want to admit that to themselves. So now they're working from a place of fear and probably feeling like an imposter. They're not communicating with themselves. They're not saying, yeah, I need to work on this leadership thing. And right now, I feel completely vulnerable and like I have no idea what's going on. It's no, I'm going to be strong and we're going to do it this way because this is the way it's always been done. And I don't really care about anybody else's perspective because I haven't actually taken mine.
So true. I love what you said there. And this is such a big thing that organizations, whether if it's hiring new talent, not just for the talent itself, but based upon the skills or transferable skills necessary for that role and duties, not just because I got to fill the position or we just promote this person because they really did well in their current position. So we just promote him here. And yet the skills are really not the same or transferable to where else. So these are the things that you're talking about can really strategically impact so many levels of any size organization. And like with anything, everything starts small. Like maybe you don't even see it, but it compounds over time to lead to those numbers that you're seeking. And when you don't have those numbers, you got to start going deeper to start looking at the stuff you're talking about and have been sharing what's going to make a difference. So anything you can expand further on that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the main things too to keep in mind is for people in these leadership positions. I mean, old musician, I still think in those terms. So as a leader, whether you like to admit it or not, you are always on stage. Someone is watching. Someone is seeing what you're doing, and they're going to take their culture cues from that. It's not in your mission, vision, and value statements. It's in how you act and how you treat others and what you do. So like you mentioned employee attrition and just, being able to keep people in the job, doing the job. If people see you actually connecting and understanding with their employees, and getting them in the spots where they're going to be able to thrive, getting them in the spots, because if you take someone and you put them in a spot that doesn't necessarily match what they can do, I mean, it's a double lose because number one, you're putting them in a spot where they can't do as well. And number two, they're lost on the spot where they could. But by being able to take that perspective and by leading by example, now you're also setting that culture that this is how we do it. We have this perspective taking. And that doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries. Empathy does not mean you don't have boundaries. Business gets done. It has to, because without it, nobody makes any money and then everybody's in the soup. But being able to take that perspective and being able to understand the other, whether that other is a single person or a group, is only going to help the entire organization.
So true. And I love what you said about boundaries because it's okay to say no. And it's okay for team members to say no. This is what unfortunately passive communicators have a tendency to do. And they say yes to everything because they're conditioned to go out of their way to please and enable others for the validation, only to now shortchange themselves, and never live up to the expectations of the people they're serving. Oh God, and it allows you now when you have boundaries, you can be valuable to others through your example of resource, not just available. Oh God, powerful.
Right.
What you just said. Can you say now for those listening to this and going, wow, I've heard this before, but what Dr. Melissa is sharing, God, maybe we got to look into this. Maybe there is something to this that we're shortchanging ourselves because we're looking for the short-term results. These are things that are not going to happen short-term. They happen long-term, but the commitment's got to start with hopefully from the top down, because that's where obviously change happens. But it doesn't matter where you are, that at least if you can be that change. Talk about, if you could talk about, how do you see the role of empathy or the empathic leader, regardless of role, evolving in the next 5 to 10 years of leadership?
Oh, I think it's going to be even more important. Obviously I'm going to say that, but, part of that too, though, as you look in these organizations, we're adding more AI. We're adding more tech. We're adding more things that don't have empathy. AI is a fantastic tool, but it isn't a person, and it cannot take the perspective of the other than what it can scrape off the web and approximate, or wherever it's getting its information from. So as we move to these kinds of systems, there's going to be less empathy and emotional intelligence. It's just that's what's going to happen. So empathy and emotional intelligence, it's supply and demand. The less supply of it there is, the more it's going to be in demand. So people who can actually get a hold of this, leaders that can figure out how to lead with empathy and emotional intelligence, they're going to be the superstars that are going to move to the future, because they're going to have skills that are going to be in demand and shorter supply.
I think it's so important that, people like yourself, leaders and subject matter experts like yourself, that are putting this out there. You can't just count on a university providing a program in this. I'm not saying there probably are out there, but it's not something that you learn in school, or let alone at the university level. These are things that either have to be learned on your own, but if you're not, obviously don't have access to the resources to now tap into this, this is why this is so important that we're getting this out there. I love it, what you just shared. And for those listening, this is so important. So, let's talk about there are many myths and misconceptions about empathy. People always have this, and I've heard this a million times. Can you share with us what that is and how it relates to things like compassion and sympathy? Because a lot of times I think people kind of confused, like they think empathy is the same as sympathy sometimes, and maybe it may not be the case. There are differences in how you approach it when you're dealing with people.
Oh yeah, huge differences. And actually that's the number one question I get asked. So, you got it right out there, big and bold, which I appreciate, because now I can answer it. Um, so sympathy actually has negative connotations. People in healthcare are trained not to approach the patients with sympathy. Empathy, you are taking the perspective of the other through their eyes. Sympathy, you're taking the perspective of the other through your eyes. And unfortunately, that usually comes with whatever baggage you have, including judgment. And here's the thing, empathy and judgment cannot exist in the same space, ever, whether it's self-empathy or empathy for others. So you actually want to try to avoid that. Well, guess what happened to me, and this is how I see it, and this is what I did in that situation, because you're bringing your own baggage with it. It's understanding the perspective of the other through their eyes.
What you said, like going back to the communication piece, you get a passive communicator, and they don't even realize they're passive because when they grew up, they had a strong need for validation they didn't get growing up. So they seek it out in other people. And all sympathy a lot of times does is create more codependency. People depend on you, and they're not doing their part. So you're never going to live up to their expectation. And it just causes a cycle of burnout and just, in this case, not trusting that you're going to follow through and deliver what they want, and keep them stuck and stagnant. It doesn't improve any bottom line or any kind of KPI, but empathy always empowers and encourages through example and resourcefulness. I love that. Anything you could do to expand it, because I really love to drive that point home to the leaders that are listening to this episode here.
Absolutely. I think the big thing too is to keep in mind that these are skills. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, well, yeah, I do take that perspective through my eyes. How do I do it? Through their eyes. Well, this is a skill you can work on and develop it. Most of the population has empathy to some degree. There's some biological basis, but there's a huge cognitive basis as well. So next time, this is the homework. Next time you want to try to take that perspective from the other person, we go back to kindergarten and you just say, how would I feel if I were in their shoes? Because that opens up that whole world of all of the baggage they bring with them. And it's something that you start working on right now. It's a practice. It's not a performance. A practice is something you do every day and every day and every day to get better at, whether it's basketball or music or whatever. You practice it. Performance is something you do one time and you're like, well, got it. That's it. This isn't a performance. This is a practice, and you can start doing it right now.
Love it. Love it. I want everybody to let that sink in, and I hope everybody will go back and listen to this episode. There is just a lot of valuable information here that Dr. Melissa is sharing here. On the types of empathy, Dr. Melissa, one thing that, there's more than one kind of empathy, which you alluded to, and what's really missing the boat right now there? Can you give us more into that particular area?
It's getting away from this idea that empathy is about feeling, because like so many of the other myths stem from that. This idea that empathy is soft, that empathy means you don't have boundaries, that empathy makes you a pushover. Well, if you take away that it's all about feelings and hearts and puppies and rainbows, suddenly all of that kind of goes away. And you understand, no, it's about understanding the perspective of the other, and this is a big one in organizations, I think, because I've run into it all the time where it's like, well, it's going to make me look weak. It's going to make me look like a pushover. And it's like, no, you being a pushover is going to make you look like a pushover. Having empathy does not mean you don't have boundaries. And it doesn't mean that you're suddenly going to be in love with everybody either. There's stuff that has to get done. But just that understanding that it's about perspective taking and not necessarily about hearts and flowers would go a long way to dispelling a lot of myths.
Like you said, it's not asking the person to become something like, hey, if you're very direct and you're results oriented and, you spare me the detail type of person, doesn't mean you're changing to be the opposite of that. You could still be the same. It's just knowing how to adapt it to the person you're talking to,
right,
to get the type of information or whatever the results are based upon how they process it, just being open to that, not just assuming that this is how I do it and this is how I process, so should you.
Right. Precisely. I have nothing to add to that.
I love it. I love it. And it's so true. I love the fact that you and I are so in alignment with this. And, I know you talked a little bit about self-empathy before. You mentioned it. And I like to kind of go into a little bit more because it's like the old adage, you really can't serve others unless you fill your own cup. It's like the oxygen mask theory. They always say, put it on yourself before you put it on your child. But a lot of times a parent will just out of instinct and default will put it on their child before themselves. You can't give what you don't have. So talk about the importance of self-empathy. What can you give us more insight to that, and how can someone build it, and why is it so important to the overall big picture of the empathic leader?
Yeah, I think it's the place to start. I don't think you can start anywhere else. And I think it's the place where most of us don't do very well. I mean, not just leaders, like all of us will do for others what we won't do for ourselves. So the oxygen mask, that's like completely spot on. So the way I try and teach it, I have kind of a 4-step process. And the problem is you say, hey, it's in 4 steps. And that makes it sound like it's simple and easy. And it's not. It takes work and it's a practice. It's something you have to do. So you start with self-observation. And that means being able to step back and watch who you are and what you're doing, but without putting any judgment on it. I call it being critical, not caring, because you're critiquing, you're understanding what's happening, but you're not placing emotional value on it. Because a lot of times when we start to, beat ourselves up for stuff, that's exactly what happens, is we're placing an emotional value on it. And again, that's I wish I could say it's as easy as those 3 words, and it's not, but it is a skill you can work on. The next step after that is self-reflection. And that's where you turn the lens inward and you start actually reflecting on what's happening. Still trying not to put judgment on it. Well, I did this and this person triggers me every single time I have a meeting. And I end up yelling at everybody. Why is that? What is this about this person that I just can't handle this? Or I did performance evals again. And once again, I gave everybody 5 stars and I missed the opportunity to help them get better. Why did I do that again? So the lens is turned in. After that, you turn the lens outward. So the 3rd step is self-awareness, which is how you interact with the world. Okay, in self-reflection, I yelled at this guy in the meeting. And what that did to the rest of the world is it shut down the whole meeting. And then I couldn't get anything across. My communication was dead in the water. That was the result.
We're probably afraid to say something, fearing that you're going to yell at them.
Right. and in the next meeting, and in the next meeting, because they're going to remember that you're on stage. They watched you do that performance, you know, which means the final step then is self-compassion. So compassion and empathy are kind of, they go together like salt and pepper shakers. Empathy is what you see or you feel. Compassion is what you do. That's the action. So as you have self-compassion, you can say, okay, the action for this is, all right, I did this. It was kind of a boneheaded move, but I seem to do it every single time. Let's just take a deep breath and see if we can do this better next time so that I can get that communication across, so that over the next 5 years, I can help save some of that 1.2 trillion that goes to bad communication. So those are the 4 steps that, goes into self-empathy. And of course, it's also not quite that easy. It isn't like you don't go back and forward and work on it. But like anything else, just like Michael Jordan shooting hoops, you get better at it by doing it.
The process. You got to keep working it. And I encourage everybody listening to go back and listen to those 4 steps to this process. Again, you're going to get a chance to also get in contact with Dr. Melissa. You could reach out and get more information there. As we get towards the end of the show, before we let people know where to contact you, just in a minute or so, I know you did a TED Talk, and I wanted this to allude to that TED Talk that you spent a lot of time in leadership circles talking to organizations. And in this talk, you talked about eliminating self-judgment through self-empathy. Just quick about what led you to put on the TED Talk and kind of tie it to what you just talked about, just about self-empathy.
Well, self-empathy is one of those things most people haven't heard of, they don't think about, and isn't really part of their lives. So I really wanted to speak on self-empathy in particular, and not just how it hits people in leadership, but how it hits all of us. Because that's the one thing we have in common, whether you're in a leadership position or not, we are all human beings and we all deal with this. So that's why I really wanted to put that out there. And I mean, TEDx, as far as a speaker format, that's the gold standard. So that's what I wanted to do. And I'm so grateful it happened because, hey, we're almost at 80,000 views today. So
I love it. Well, we want to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to watch that TED Talk. And again, we'll make sure all of those will be in the show notes. As we get near, we're at the end of the time of the show, and I want to make sure that the listeners have time to get to, know how to contact you, what you're up to, anything that you'd like to give them. First, before we do that, I want to thank you and everybody here at the Sustainable Success Show team for your time today, taking time out of your today's schedule to be with us, sharing this information.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Plus, it's great to see you again. It's great
Yes,
to be
absolutely. Absolutely. So if you could kindly share with the audience, what are you up to? How can they contact with you? Anything you like to give them? This could be information about the book, the TEDx talk, anything that you'd like to share with them.
Yeah. So the best place to find me is at my website, and that's at EQVIA, and that's V as in Victor, IA, empathy.com. And you can sign up for my newsletter. You can buy my book there. There's a link to the TEDx. There's all of that. The book is also available on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and, the usuals. And you can always catch me on LinkedIn and Instagram, not as much, but LinkedIn in particular. And I would love for people to take a look at the TEDx talk and the book and get a better feel for some of these empathy concepts that maybe, they're like, well, I think I know what empathy is, but I don't really know what it is. And even though the book is geared towards leaders, don't dismiss it if you're not necessarily in a CEO spot, because we all have to be a leader of one before we can be a leader of many.
Regardless of title. And I love the fact that towards the end of the show, you got into the self-empathy, and it doesn't matter if that's in business or in your personal life. We could all learn more about self-empathy. We can't be examples and resources for others to do for themselves if we're not aware of it ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. Powerful stuff. We highly encourage everybody to reach out to Dr. Melissa. Again, all that information will be in the show notes as well. We encourage you to connect with her on LinkedIn in addition to that. And again, if for any reason, if you get in touch with us here at Sustainable Success at chris@sustainablesuccess.net, we'd be more than happy to connect you with Dr. Melissa, and we'll go ahead and do that as well. We also want to encourage all you listeners that if there is any content you'd like to see on a future show that we have not covered, feel free to reach out to our team here at chris@sustainablesuccess.net. Yes, that's chris@sustainablesuccess.net. Tell everybody we have a new show time now, Friday, 12 noon, every Friday at 12 noon. This is when we air, but you can listen to the show anytime on demand, again, after that time. So feel free to check out Dr. Melissa. We encourage you to go back and listen to the show a few times because there was a lot of golden nuggets. Till then, everybody, have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next week, same time here, 12 noon on Friday. Take care.